He thought it was just an old family photo buried in the attic until he noticed a little girl standing next to him. When he discovered who she really was, he was left stunned and everything he believed about his past came crashing down. Why was she in his childhood picture? And why had his entire family kept her a secret? Marcus Thompson was 78 years old when a dusty box in his attic cracked open a secret that had been buried for decades. He hadn't planned to spend the afternoon there. He'd only gone up to look for an old lamp, but tucked behind a stack of moth-eaten quilts, he found something he hadn't seen in years. An old cardboard box, brittle with age, its corners chewed by time. Inside were family photos, dozens of them. Grainy, warm-toned snapshots of holidays, picnics, and quiet living room moments. Most were familiar echoes of a childhood long gone. But one photo stopped him cold. His parents, Dorothy and William Thompson, stood smiling, proud and youthful with baby Marcus bundled in William's arms. But next to them stood a little girl. She was maybe 3 years old, dressed in a patterned coat with lace at the collar, her small hand resting on Marcus's shoulder like a guardian. Marcus's heart skipped. He didn't remember this girl. Not her face, not her name, not even the idea of her. And that couldn't be right. All his life, Marcus had believed he was an only child. His parents had said so. Everyone had. His childhood was one of undivided attention. Books, toys, hand-sewn sweaters, and summer road trips where the back seat belonged to him alone. So who was this girl? And why had no one ever mentioned her? Marcus sat on the attic floor, the photo trembling in his hands. A quiet unease crept into his chest. Was this some forgotten family friend? A cousin passing through? Or something more? He turned the photo over. No name, no date, just a faint stain where time had soaked through. Marcus Thompson wasn't the kind of man who clung to the past. A retired schoolteacher and lifelong Riverdale resident, he'd always prided himself on being grounded, practical in thought, deliberate in action. But ever since finding the photograph in the attic, something inside him had shifted. He couldn't explain it, not fully. There was no name, no clue, no logical reason to believe that the girl in the photo had meant anything. And yet he felt it. The photo wasn't just a forgotten family keepsake. It was a thread dangling from the hem of a much larger story, one someone had tried very hard to snip away. Marcus began the search close to home. He pulled out old phone numbers and reached out to the people who had known his parents best, those still alive and old enough to remember the 1940s. Many had foggy recollections at best. A few thought the photo looked vaguely familiar, but none could identify the girl. Each dead end only made the mystery more personal. Finally, he turned to someone who had grown up alongside him, someone who had been in and out of the Thompson household since they were children, his cousin, Sarah Mitchell. Sarah was 2 years older than Marcus and still sharp as ever. They'd always shared a close bond, even in adulthood. Sunday phone calls, holiday dinners, small birthday traditions never forgotten. If anyone could confirm what he was starting to suspect, however impossible, it would be her. They met in Sarah's modest ivy-lined home on Maple Street. She welcomed him with the usual warmth, her silver hair tied in a neat bun, her eyes full of curiosity as Marcus pulled the photo from his coat pocket and set it gently on the table between them. Sarah leaned in, adjusted her glasses, and studied the image for a long moment. "That's you," she said with a soft smile, tapping the baby in William Thompson's arms. "You've always had those cheeks." Marcus nodded. "And the girl?" Her smile faltered. She tilted her head slightly, narrowing her eyes. "I don't know," she said finally. "Is she a neighbor's kid? A family friend?" "She's standing with us. My parents, her hands on my shoulder like we belong to each other." Sarah frowned and leaned back. "I've never seen her before, Marcus. I promise. As far as I've ever known, you were their only child." Marcus's hands rested on the table, fingers curled slightly. He had hoped, half expected, that she'd laugh and tell him it was someone obvious, a second cousin, a visiting niece, something benign. But the look on Sarah's face told him this wasn't some forgotten holiday snapshot. It was something else entirely. He tried to keep his voice steady. You used to stay with my parents, didn't you? I remember stories of you spending whole summers with them when I was little. All the time, Sarah replied. Your dad even taught me how to fish. Your mom made the best blackberry pie. But I swear to you, Marcus, I would have remembered that girl. She's not familiar, not even a little. Silence settled over the room. Marcus studied his cousin's face. She wasn't lying, at least not that he could tell, but her certainty only deepened his own unease. If Sarah, who had practically been a fixture in his childhood home, had no memory of the girl, then either the photo was some elaborate mistake, or someone had gone to great lengths to bury a piece of his past. And for the first time since he'd begun this search, Marcus felt something new stir inside him. Doubt, not just about the photo or the girl, but about everything. The days that followed felt like walking through a house where every door had been quietly locked from the inside. Marcus continued reaching out to relatives, names from his mother's side, distant cousins from his father's. Some still lived nearby, others he had to call across state lines. Most were kind but confused. A few didn't even return his calls. Not one of them recognized the girl in the photograph. The same sentence echoed like a lullaby, almost rehearsed. You've always been the only child. But Marcus was no longer convinced. There was a strange silence woven through the responses. Not the silence of forgetting, but the silence of avoidance. The kind that made your skin crawl because something felt off, but you couldn't yet prove it. He nearly gave up until he remembered Aunt Rebecca. She was his mother's older sister, 95 years old, and still living in the same creaky farmhouse where she and her husband had raised 4 children. Her memory had faded in recent years. Some days were clearer than others. But if anyone might remember that chapter of family history, it was her. Marcus made a plan. He wouldn't warn her ahead of time, wouldn't give her time to prepare, to deflect, or rehearse an answer. If there was anything to be uncovered, it would happen in the moment. So he drove out on a crisp Thursday afternoon, a copy of the photograph in his coat pocket. As he pulled into the gravel driveway, he felt a nervous thrum in his chest, part fear, part anticipation. He hadn't felt like this in decades. Aunt Rebecca welcomed him with the same warm smile she'd worn since he was a boy. They sat at her kitchen table, the windows fogged slightly from the simmering pot of apple cider on the stove. Marcus kept the conversation light at first. Asked about her garden, her knees, the weather. She answered with small chuckles and careful words. Then he pulled the photograph from his pocket and slid it across the table. Rebecca squinted, brought it closer, and held it up to the light. She said nothing for a long time. Marcus could see her hands begin to tremble, her lips parted slightly, her gaze fixed on the little girl's face. And then, almost unconsciously, she whispered, "That's Isabella." Marcus froze. A second later, she gasped and slapped her hand to her mouth. Her eyes widened with horror as if she'd just let a ghost slip from between her teeth. "Oh no," she said almost inaudibly. "I wasn't supposed to say that." "Who's Isabella?" Marcus leaned in. Rebecca shook her head. "Forget I said anything." "Rebecca," he said more firmly this time. "Please, who is she?" Her shoulders sank. The strength she'd greeted him with seemed to dissolve into the chair beneath her. She stared at the photo as if it had aged her 10 more years. She was important," she murmured. "To you, to all of us. But we weren't supposed to talk about her." "Why not?" She didn't answer. Marcus pressed gently. "Rebecca, I need to know. I've spent weeks trying to understand why this photo exists, why no one remembers this girl, why no one will remember her. Please tell me who she is." Her voice cracked. "We only did it to protect you, all of us, your parents, my husband. We thought it was best at the time. The world was different then. We didn't understand things the way we do now." "Protect me from what?" I can't tell you that. It's not for me to say, but if you really want answers, and if my words don't stop you, you'll find them in the Riverdale Regional Archives. That's where the truth is." She looked up, her eyes glassy, her mouth trembling. "I was quiet for so many years," she said. "I'm sorry." Marcus sat back in his chair, the weight of her words pressing against his chest like bricks. Isabella. A name, a crack in the silence, and a direction. he didn't say another word. He stood, kissed her softly, and walked out the door with the photo tucked back into his pocket. The next morning, he went to the archives. He didn't know what he'd find there, but deep down, he already knew. Nothing in his life would ever be the same again. The Riverdale Regional Archives was housed in a building that looked more like a chapel than a municipal office. Inside, the scent of old paper and wood polish lingered like the breath of history itself. Marcus walked slowly down the narrow corridors, the photograph clutched in one hand, a quiet tension building behind his ribs. The clerk at the front desk barely looked up as he handed over his ID and request form. It was a slow day, which suited him fine. He was directed to the family records wing, a high-ceiling hall of tall filing cabinets and handwritten ledgers that stretched back more than a century. The silence was reverent. He felt like a trespasser, as though he were about to uncover something meant to stay buried. Marcus began with the Thompson file. He opened the thick binder slowly, flipping past entries of birth certificates, marriage records, deed filings. His parents' names, Dorothy and William Thompson, appeared on a clean page titled Family Lineage, and there, beneath their names, was the truth that struck him harder than anything yet. Children? None. His breath caught. He stared at the words, his throat dry. There was no Marcus Thompson listed, no son, no mention of him at all. For a moment he wondered if it was a clerical error, but deep down he already knew. His hands moved faster now, searching through the other volumes. He flipped past yellowing pages and brittle folders until one of the older books tumbled forward from the back of the shelf. A small stack of unfiled documents spilled out from between its pages. That's when he saw it. A certificate with a faded blue header, the name printed in neat, typewritten ink, Isabella Kowalski. And tucked just underneath it, another, Stefan Kowalski. Born February 3rd, 1945. Adopted April 18th, 1946. Marcus blinked hard, his stomach flipping. Stefan, that name. His mother Dorothy had sometimes called him that when he was very young. He'd always brushed it off as an odd slip of the tongue. Now he understood. Stefan was his real name. He had been adopted. And Isabella, she was more than just the mystery girl in the photo. She was his biological sister. The silence in the archive hall grew heavier around him. He sat down at a wooden table, the photo in front of him, the documents beside it. His hands rested on the wood, unmoving, as the realization settled over him in full. Everything he knew about his life, his family, his history, his identity had been a carefully maintained illusion. Not out of malice, perhaps, but out of fear. Out of a belief that forgetting the past might somehow protect him from it. But no more. He sat there for hours, combing through records, trying to stitch together the story that had been hidden from him. The Kowalskis, his real parents, were Polish immigrants who had arrived in the U.S. after the war. The records indicated they died in a car crash just after his first birthday. He and Isabella were taken in by the Thompsons shortly after, then legally adopted the following spring. He found one final note, a photograph attached to a registry form. It was the same photo he had found in the attic, except this one had handwriting scrolled across the back. Adoption Day, Marcus Stefan, age 1, Isabella, age 3, Thompson family. The proof was irrefutable. They hadn't just known her, they had raised her, at least for a time. She had been part of the family. Then she vanished from all the records. And now he understood why no one wanted to talk about her. They had separated the children, cut the thread, rewritten the story, and Marcus had been living with only half of the truth. He stood up slowly, the pages carefully folded and placed in his coat pocket. His hands no longer trembled. His voice didn't falter as he walked out the door. There was only one thing left to do now. He had to find out what happened to Isabella. He sat in his car, staring out the windshield in silence, and then his phone rang. He glanced at the screen. Aunt Rebecca. He hesitated, then answered. "I assume," she said softly, "that by now you know who the girl in the photo is. Don't you, Stefan?" The name struck like a chord in a quiet room. Marcus didn't respond. "Come over," she said after a pause. "Bring what you found. I think it's time." He arrived just before nightfall. This time, Rebecca didn't ask him how he was. She didn't smile, didn't offer tea. She led him straight to the kitchen and sat across from him at the same worn table. Marcus laid the documents in front of her. "I know I was adopted," he said quietly. "I know my name was Stefan. I know Isabella was my sister." Rebecca looked down at the papers. "Yes," she whispered. "You're right." He waited, giving her space to speak. "You were both so small when it happened," she began. "Your parents, Jan and Sophia, they were killed in a car crash. Dorothy and William took you both in because they had been close friends for years. They planned to raise you as their own." Marcus nodded slowly. "So what happened? Why don't I remember her?" Rebecca sighed. "You and Isabella were grieving. Neither of you fully understood what had happened, but the trauma, it showed. You cried constantly. She had night terrors. The doctor back then said you were feeding off each other's sadness, that staying together was making it worse. So they split us up," Marcus said, finishing the thought. "Yes," she said. "They thought it would help. They thought if you each had a clean start, you'd grow up happy. And you did, in your own way." He stared at her. "But where did she go?" Rebecca hesitated. Her eyes welled up. "We didn't want to erase her from your life entirely, so we kept her close. We gave her to another branch of the family, your aunt and uncle, and we changed her name. We thought if you ever crossed paths again, you could have something, even if you didn't know." Marcus leaned forward, confused. "Wait, what are you saying?" Rebecca looked him directly in the eyes. "You know her already." Silence fell. "You've known her your whole life," she said. "You even spoke to her this week." Marcus stared at her, not breathing. Rebecca's voice cracked. "Her name isn't Isabella anymore. She's Sarah, Sarah Mitchell." Marcus's breath caught. He stared across the table, the old photo between them now carrying the weight of a lifetime. Sarah. He had known her his entire life. Cousin Sarah. They had shared holidays, family gatherings, the ordinary patterns of closeness. How could she be Isabella? It couldn't be, but he saw it now. Not just in the name, in the silence that had followed them for years, the familiarity that never quite had a name. He stood up abruptly, the chair scraping loudly behind him. "I have to go," Marcus muttered. Rebecca didn't stop him. He drove straight to Sarah's house, barely feeling the road beneath the tires. The sky had already dimmed, but he could barely see it. All he could think about was the look on Rebecca's face and the truth now burning a hole in his chest. When Sarah opened the door, she smiled the same soft smile he'd seen 1,000 times. "Marcus," she said, brushing a lock of hair behind her ear. "Back again. What's going on?" "I need to talk to you," Marcus said. His voice was calm, but it didn't sound like his own. "Sure," Sarah said, stepping aside. "Come in." They sat at her kitchen table, the same spot where he'd shown her the photo before, only now he placed it down again, but this time with something heavier beneath it. Official documents, adoption records. She looked at them with cautious curiosity. "What is all this?" Marcus's voice was low but steady. "I found her." Sarah blinked. "Who?" "The girl in the photograph," he said. "Her name was Isabella Kowalski." Sarah narrowed her eyes. "Kowalski?" She was 3 years old when she was adopted by the Thompsons alongside a baby named Stefan. She was starting to shake her head, but Marcus pressed on. "My name wasn't always Marcus. It was Stefan Kowalski. That baby was me." "What are you saying?" she asked, sitting straighter in her chair. Marcus looked her directly in the eye. "I was adopted after my biological parents died in a car crash, and so were you." Sarah froze. "You were Isabella," he said softly. "They changed your name and raised us separately." Her mouth opened slightly, but no sound came. Her eyes scanned the documents, the photo, and then landed on him. "No," she whispered. "No, that can't be right." "I didn't know either," Marcus said. "Not until a few days ago. Not until I found this." Sarah stood up from her chair. "That's not possible. I've always been Sarah." I mean, yes, I was adopted, but they never told me anything. I never knew who my real parents were. That was by design, Marcus said. They thought keeping us apart was better, easier, safer. She began pacing slowly, hands trembling. I would remember something like that, wouldn't I? I don't, Marcus said gently. But the records do. The names, the dates, the photo, it's all here, and it all points to you. Sarah turned away, her voice cracking. This is too much. I don't know what to believe. There was a long silence between them. The kitchen felt too small for the weight in the room. Sarah turned away again, her arms folded tightly across her chest, as if holding herself together. You really believe this? She asked. That I'm her? I don't believe it, Marcus said quietly. I know it. She shook her head slowly. I don't remember you. I don't remember you either, he said. But that doesn't make it less true. Sarah stared at the photograph again, her breath catching. Her voice, when it came, was barely audible. Why didn't anyone tell us? Because they thought they were protecting us. A bitter laugh slipped from her lips. Protecting us by erasing everything? Marcus didn't answer. What could he say? And then, without warning, she dropped into the chair across from him, covered her face with both hands, and let the silence break into sobs. Years of confusion, years of something missing and never knowing what. Marcus sat there, helpless, watching his sister fall apart over a life they'd been denied. When she finally looked up, her face was streaked with tears. I should be angry, she said, at them, at all of them. But right now I'm just tired of not knowing who I am. Marcus nodded. You're not alone anymore, he said. That's what matters now. She didn't respond with words. She reached across the table, her hand trembling, and took his in hers. It wasn't a reunion with trumpets or hugs. It was quiet, but real. And after everything, they both knew it was the start of something they should have never lost. In the days that followed, Marcus and Sarah didn't talk much about the past. They didn't need to. The truth sat quietly between them, shaping every moment in ways neither could explain. They met more often now. Small visits, short walks, long silences that said more than words could. There were no big speeches, no dramatic declarations, just two people finally aware of what had been taken from them. Sarah once said, I keep wondering how different things might have been if we'd grown up together. Marcus didn't answer right away. Then he said, we didn't, but we still have now. That was enough. They couldn't reclaim the years they lost, but they could finally begin the ones that were still ahead. Marcus and Sarah lost a childhood they never knew they shared. But they didn't lose everything, because in the quiet wreckage of what was taken, they found each other. Sometimes reconciliation comes too late. Other times it arrives just in time, but with scars you never expected to carry. How do you begin to rebuild a bond that should have never been broken in the first place?